everyone, and welcome back to Claim Your Potential, the Empowerment Podcast. I'm your host, Sofie, and for this episode, I'll be discussing passion projects and work-life balance. I was actually inspired after looking at the podcast's audience statistics, and yes, we do look at those. We can see certain demographics, and I found that 61% of the audience are between the ages of 18 to 22. And this age range, I've been asked a lot by my peers, by friends, by people that I meet in different social settings. And usually they're between the ages of 18 to 22, university age, out of university, or just out of university. And I get asked a lot, Sofie, how do you do it? Sofie, how on earth do you manage all of these different things that you're doing? And to provide a bit of context, I work about 20 hours a week in 2 different positions. And I also am a full-time student, and I am an avid fencer, and I produce this podcast, and I host this podcast, and I create social media content and do all that promotion and management there. And somehow, despite all of these different moving parts I have in my life, I do manage to have a pretty active social life, believe it or not. And when I talk about things that I do and how I spend my free time and how I spend just my day-to-day scheduling, I get asked a lot how on earth I do it. And especially when it came to podcast creation, I was like, Sofie, how are you going to manage everything else that you have going on top of hosting and basically creating a podcast from the ground up? And it's another thing producing for people that aren't too sure what that means for a podcaster. And it doesn't mean just recording. It means, talking to those guests. It means writing scripts. It means going into GarageBand and editing pretty much every single thing by hand. It's creating your intro music. It is creating logos, cover art, social media posts. All of that, those different moving parts is part of at least my role as a host and producer. For me, a website was incredibly important because I think it's about 54% of you listen to my podcast via the website. Creating that website and all those different components that are part of podcast creation, as well as maintenance. And the reason that this was such an easy passion project to take on is because I'm very familiar with the different components that are involved in podcasting. I have previously podcasted before. I was pretty comfortable with how to use the different softwares, with how to, speak being recorded, with, editing and website creation. I also have a personal profile website, and sometimes just for fun, I will go into GoDaddy or Squarespace or one of those website builders, and I'll just play around for fun with different makeup businesses that I can create. Creating that website was basically what solidified this passion project for me. And the first thing that you want to think about when starting a passion project, or you're thinking about starting one, is to pick something that motivates you, right? Pick something that you're excited about because it is a lot of work. And if you are thinking content creation, especially like a blog, a podcast, anything around in that realm, it is a lot of work. We just launched a new website, and that was well over 30 hours of labor time. Our first website was probably about 60 hours of labor time because I didn't have any templates made for that beforehand. So you have to pick something that excites you, that thrills you, that you are going to be excited about. And again, it's unpaid time. And in fact, it's invested time. I've invested not only my time, but my money into this passion project. And so this would not be continuing if I wasn't excited, if I wasn't happy to sit in front of this microphone in my bedroom by myself and just talk to you all and talk to our guests. If that didn't excite me, then either A, this podcast would not be very good, or B, this podcast would die out. And for anyone that's thinking about starting a podcast and any kind of content creation project, that is something that you really need to take into account, is that you have to be able to put those hours in and setting aside time to put in those hours. Otherwise, you're going to lose motivation, especially if you're picking something that does not excite you. That is something that I truly have found from personal experience. I used to have a podcast several years ago called Breakfast at Sofie's, And it was a activism as well as political and social reform podcast. And I would throw sometimes a little bit of health and wellness in there, mental well-being episodes within that as well. And I noticed that I was not consistent with it whatsoever. I was putting out maybe a couple episodes a month, and then I would basically settle down for a couple months and drop off the face of the earth. And then I would start posting every week, and then I would go to once a month. And then basically there was no longevity. There was no continuity. There wasn't a pattern to my episodes, first of all. And there wasn't anything that was going to have a legacy, right? Because I wasn't building the brand. I was just throwing out a couple episodes here and there, whatever I had time to do. And there is no legacy that you can have with that. If you're not putting in the time, if you're not putting in, the hours, if you're not putting in the effort, if you're not, sometimes, unfortunately, you do have to invest a little bit of money into your passion project, because a lot of software is not free, right? A lot of things that you're going to find you need to build the best quality product is not free. And so there was no longevity to this previous podcast I had because I wasn't investing in it. I wasn't caring about the content I was putting out. I wasn't making sure that I was putting something out there that I was proud of. I wasn't putting something out there that made me feel like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I want to share this with people. It was more like I was putting content out simply to put content out. And coming from creating political and social reform themed episodes, there wasn't a legacy also in that because it's politics. And politics are changing all the time. Social issues are changing all the time. And so eventually I had to ask myself, would people be listening to these episodes a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Will these episodes still matter in the long run? And the answer is not at all, because they wouldn't be relevant. Because me talking about the 2016 election would not be relevant 10 years from now for someone to listen to. You have to ask yourself that. Is what I'm pushing out, is that going to be relevant? Are people going to look at this, listen to this a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Even 20 years from now? And are people still going to connect with the information that I'm presenting? And for Classy, Sassy, and a Bit Badassy, I have found that to be true, that the content that I am putting out 10 years from now will still be relevant. I have found that an empowerment podcast, there's nothing that's really tied to current events. And so when you think about your passion project, take into account relevance. Something else to take into consideration when thinking about a passion project is your technical skills. Tapping into technical skills that you already have or are currently developing or you want to develop. Something that's maybe been on your bucket list. Maybe it's taking a website building class, or it's taking a sound mixing class, something that you've been wanting to learn as a technical skill. For me, I tapped into those skills, having a previous podcasting background, as well as someone that used to have a blog that was on a self-made website, and also already having a website that I manage besides Classy, Sassy, and a Bit Badassy. And coming from that background, I knew that I'm fairly confident in my abilities to build a website. And so for anyone who's considering any form of a passion project that requires a website, which I highly recommend that pretty much any passion project have one, because it's a great place to house every single piece of information that is needed to access your passion project. I highly recommend starting off with GoDaddy Website Builder. It's very low entry cost. It is a great way to get familiar with website building. And then once you've grown enough and gotten more familiar with how to build a website, and you started to figure out, okay, what do I want from this website? What are the needs? What are the functionalities that this builder needs to have? Maybe it needs to have a store function. Maybe it needs to be able to send out mailing and newsletters to people via email. Maybe it needs to have some way to donate. Maybe it needs a blog. Maybe it needs to have a place for an RSS feed. Anything like that. And once you start to figure out those functionalities, you can then upgrade to a different host. I went from GoDaddy to Squarespace. And personally, I'm a big fan of Squarespace. I think it's a little bit more on the costly end, but the reason I got Squarespace is because I'm able to actually edit how my website looks on mobile, which you can't do on GoDaddy. So anyone considering GoDaddy, just be warned, you cannot edit how your website looks on a phone. Other than that, it's a great entry website tool. The first thing that I like to do when I have a passion project idea is to actually go see if the domain is available. And then I also go to Facebook and Instagram to check and see if there's a username available. And for me, this solidifies any kind of passion project because I want to be able to get the name out there and I want it to be in a form that I'm happy to use. And for anyone that's thinking, oh my gosh, that sounds so expensive, it's really not that expensive to buy a domain. Mine was about $2.99 for the year. So it's very affordable to go buy a domain. So if anyone has a passion project that they're thinking of and they're like, that name would be so good, I really want just something that's this name, go buy that domain. Even if you just sit on it for a bit, you can always sell it back to GoDaddy, which is something that I don't think a lot of people know, that you can actually sell a domain back. So you don't really lose money there. The other thing to take into account is for technical skills is anything that's like Canva, Adobe Photoshop, Premiere Cut, those video and photo editing softwares are incredibly useful to most passion projects because even if you're not creating content as your passion project, you still have to market it, right? You still have to promote it. And so being able to create promotional videos, promotional graphics is really key to having a passion project that not only holds longevity, but also holds a legacy. And so that was another skill that I personally tapped into was Canva. And really, it's, first of all, not that hard to learn, Canva. Highly recommend learning it. It is a wonderful tool for social media and YouTube banners and logos and website graphics and things like that. I use it for almost everything. I swear by Canva. And then the other thing to consider with technical skills would actually be GarageBand for anyone that's considering podcasting. Because GarageBand, I don't know if it's free, but I thought it came with all new computers, if I'm not mistaken. And it might be free now on iPads, and I'm pretty sure it's free on the phone. But back in the day, you had to pay for it. But I don't think so anymore. And GarageBand is a very easy to use, very simple. There's so many tutorials on it. You can actually go to Apple and they will teach you it for free. And that is how I edit my podcast. And so that's another skill to start looking into. And if you know how to use GarageBand to its most basic function, you can put a podcast out there. And for anyone else that's considering podcasting and is curious, well, how do you host your podcast? Like where do you put the episode? So a quick thing is like to get on Spotify and Google Podcast and Apple Podcast, you need to host your podcast on a third party. Now, I know there's ways around this, but it's very complicated to figure out if you don't already know that particular method. I think it has something to do with making your own RSS feed and hosting it on a website, but it's very complicated to do it that way. And so for anyone starting out who's not too familiar with podcasting, the best thing to do is to use a hosting service. And you pretty much create the show with them. So, you put your show title in, you put the description, you put your cover art, and you get the description, and they'll give you something called an RSS feed. And that's a link. And then you submit that to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, all of those. Now, if you're like me and you really don't know how to do that, the best thing to do is to use something called Anchor. And Anchor is owned by Spotify, and it is completely 100% free to use. Anyone who's ever looked into podcasting, that is very, very rare. A lot of podcast hosting services require you to pay, or they require you to pay after you reach a certain number of episodes. So Anchor is 100% free, and it's a free podcast host service. And so the minute you sign up, you get put onto Spotify because it's owned by Spotify. And then they also give you that RSS feed link. And then you submit it to all the different podcast services such as Amazon Music and Apple Podcasts and all those different ones. And it's really easy to do. You can just look it up online and you'll, go to the link and you'll submit it. And then they'll put it on there within about 24 hours. Anyone who's thinking about podcasting, highly, highly, highly recommend. So that was the technical aspects that I took into consideration when starting my passion project. And something else that I would really encourage, especially for university students, is to touch into the resources that you have. It is quite actually insane the amount of resources that university campuses have that we as students really do not know about. Up until this episode, I was actually using a free Yeti microphone that I had rented out from my university, and it was a free resource. Actually, it still is a free resource on campus for students. And anyone who's interested in audiovisual production that needs access to equipment, you can rent it out for free. And they also have a audiovisual production studio and a bunch of other really cool things that I had no idea I could access as part of my tuition. And this is actually something that's not only unique to university campuses, but I've actually found them in several different libraries, whether that's back home or in DC or other places. I've found that a lot of libraries do offer audiovisual production suites, some of which even have their own microphones. And these suites are also usually places that are quiet and it's locked and secluded from people, so you don't have to worry about background noise in your videos or your podcast or your music video or music creation or whatever you're trying to create. And that is an amazing tool that is super accessible, and it's a lot more accessible than I thought it was. And so sometimes I will use the one on campus if I have a guest and I know that maybe there's water work being done in my home or my roommate might have people over. And so I know that I can go to that audiovisual production suite and have a quiet space to record without being interrupted. Another resource that exists on, I don't know if it's a lot of different university campuses, but I know it's not just mine. You can actually get professional headshots on campus done pretty much for free. I got one about 48 hours ago that my university offers for free. And by the time you're listening to this episode, you will see that awesome headshot that was taken by my university. And so this is a service that I think you can probably get for free if you look hard enough. I'm sure that there's some nonprofit somewhere, probably in your area, that might have career development services. Sometimes I've heard of libraries doing this. I've heard of other universities doing this. I know that sometimes even companies will offer this as a service to employees. So really just do a little bit of a deep dive, look into it, and see where you can take a professional headshot for free. If not for free, for a reduced rate, because they're typically very expensive, but you can find one that is relatively very affordable or even free. And so that's another resource to take advantage of, whether you're doing content creation or maybe you just want to build yourself a personal portfolio website or you need it for LinkedIn. Everyone needs a headshot at some point. It really does come in handy, especially for someone like me who was starting to grow a brand and reach out to fellow podcasters. And it's good to have it as a marketing material. It is insanely beneficial, not only in career, but I feel like for any passion project, it requires personal branding. Having a face to put to the name, to put to the personal brand, is essential for creating that project and for creating a legacy project. And so that's another resource to take advantage of. So once you've maybe researched resources near you and have written out those technical skills that you have, written out your motivations, and maybe just some possible name ideas, because I feel like everything starts with a name. I always loved the phrase classy, sassy, and a bit badassy. And so that is how this entire podcast sparked. Another thing is connecting your passion project to what's going on in your life right now. Because if you think about it this way, this is almost like a diary for you, almost like a memento, something that you can look back on 10 years from now, 20 years from now. And when you look back on that passion project, you'll be truly looking back on what was going on in your life at the time of creation. And for me, Claim Your Potential came about because I was feeling lost. I was feeling drained. I was feeling not happy, not myself. I had gotten out of a pretty up and down relationship. I was going through a lot of mental health spirals. And I've always struggled with keeping friends and basically just being truly myself with people. And I wouldn't say I have completely solved everything in my life by having a passion project. Absolutely not. Otherwise I wouldn't be here still. But it's definitely so much better than it has been in the past. I'm feeling so much better than I've been in the past. And looking back at where I was at that point and where I am now, a big part of where I am now is attributed to this podcast. And when you're thinking about a passion project, think about it like that. Think about something that is not only going to help others, but is also going to help you. Whether it's helping you heal from a bad relationship or helping you finally feel empowered and feel like the person that you truly are and that you have an outlet for your authentic self. Your passion project is more so a tool because this is essential to your own development. At the end of the day, and I hate that phrase, but truly, you do not need to make money from this. I don't expect to make money from my podcast. I'm happy to do it because it has helped me immensely to grow and to become someone that I am truly proud of and to live a life that I not only feel content with, but happy. And that also ties into this next topic, which is work-life balance. And when you think about passion projects and you think about work-life balance and figuring out the life that you want to create for yourself, something that I've always loved is this idea of changing our perception of weekend. A lot of us use weekends as a way to escape our life, a way to de-stress, and to basically tap out of our life and our responsibility. And while there's nothing wrong with de-stressing, I de-stress every single weekend, but it's better to use your weekend to start building a life that you don't want to escape from. And that's what I do with my weekends, is I work on my podcast because a year from now, 5 years from now, I want to build this to be a legacy, to be part of my empire. I just love saying my empire, but to be a part of my empire. And I really want to build this up. And so I use my weekends not to escape my life, but to create a life that a year from now, 5 years from now, I can say, I did it. I did it. I'm happy. I love my life. I love everything that I'm doing with my life. I love what I'm creating for the world. I feel like I have a purpose. That is something that I think is really key to how you spend your weekend. And going back into my initial question that I get from people about my time and of just how do you do it? How do I manage all these different things? What is my work-life balance like? And a lot of it is based on this philosophy of I truly do have time for everything. We have time to accomplish everything that we truly want to accomplish. Emphasis on the word want. The reason that we say we don't have time for things is because we are making an excuse. We are saying to ourselves that it's not that I don't have time for this, it's that I don't want to make the time for this. It's that this does not matter enough for me to find a time to do this. We have 24 hours in a day. 8 of that is sleeping. That is 16 hours that we have to do what we want to do. And if you take down that even further, let's say 8 of that 16 is going to work or going to university, then another 8 hours you now have left in your day. Maybe you have An hour for breakfast, an hour for lunch, say an hour for dinner. That's another 5 hours that you have that you aren't using. So what are you doing with those 5 hours? How are you creating a life that truly makes you happy and that truly gets you out of bed in the morning? How are you using your time? When I think about work-life balance, I always think about it from that perspective, is that I truly do have the time, and if something is important enough to me, I will make the time to do it. And that goes for my social relationships, that goes for this podcast, that goes for work, that goes for school, and that goes for personal care. Me time, I have always found a way to do it. I've always put that chunk of time into my schedule. I always put a chunk of time for social relationships, to do podcast work, to do homework, to have my work time. And a balance is something that we need to be thinking about. Because a lot of the time we think to ourselves, oh my God, I just don't have the time. I know I have 8 hours, but I just don't think I have the time to balance all these different responsibilities, to do all these different things. I challenge everyone to go into your calendar and then go on a piece of paper and start writing out just the times of everything. Things you know you need to get done, things in general, such as, have breakfast, go to school, go to work, things like that. Then, maybe putting out your morning routine. How long does your morning routine last? How long does your evening routine need to be? And then once you started chunking off those pieces of time, you'll start to notice the gaps that you have in your time, the gaps that you can fill with a passion project, with personal care time, with going out to dinner with friends, with dating, with taking an extra shift, with studying, with whatever you want it to be. We truly do have time in our day. And I know that's probably not the answer that you were expecting or that you wanted to hear for work-life balance, but that's what it is. I feel as though the best way to address work-life balance is by recognizing that everyone truly does have the time to do things. We just don't find some things important enough to take the time for them. Also, take time to do things that spark joy and relaxation. Take time for yourself, because even with passion projects, even with this podcast, as much as I love it, sometimes it stresses me out. Even with fencing, I chose to take a semester off because it was just stressing me out more than it needed to. So also take that into consideration. Take time for yourself and take time to think about those commitments. Maybe take yourself out of some commitments that you just are not excited about, that you don't feel is helping your life or is benefiting your life. Maybe you're part of too many clubs, too many friend groups. Maybe you're in a chorus or a book club or other extracurriculars. And if they are just not bringing you excitement, if you are thinking like, oh my gosh, do I have to go to book club today? Really? Gosh, I don't know, man. If that is crossing your mind at all, then you are not motivated by that activity, by that commitment. That is not making you happy. And so it's okay to say no. It's okay to say, hey, look, I just don't think I have the time or the mental energy to take on this responsibility right now, or to take on this commitment right now. And that's completely okay. There is nothing wrong with doing that. And in fact, people need to do it more, because a lot of the time people just say yes to everything. And I notice this a lot, especially people in university. They say yes to every single commitment, to every single opportunity. And you know what happens to those people in their first semester? They burn out. They get sick. They realize, I cannot keep this up. I am exhausted. And that is when you know that you have spread yourself too thin, because you don't want to get to that point. You don't want to get to the point of burnout. The whole purpose with work-life balance is to prevent burnout from happening in the first place. And to take it rather from an issue or from a medical perspective, treat the cause from a public health perspective. When it comes to stress, you have to treat it like a public health issue. Thinking about it in the sense of what is causing me to feel a little bit stressed? What is the root? Is this stress going to worsen? How can I stop the stress from happening in the first place? So address stresses while they are still minute, before they start to snowball. And that is really the key to creating work-life balance, is to break it down, to examine, to look at it from an outside perspective, and really get in touch with your feelings and how certain tasks and certain commitments and people and jobs and all these other things, how they're making you feel. Because life is too short to do things that don't make you feel good, to do things that don't benefit your life, to do things that frankly don't matter to you. And before we wrap up, something else to take away from this episode is be excited about the content that you are creating. When you are thinking about that passion project, find something that lights a fire in you, because that is how you are going to be able to keep going and to keep putting your time into that project and to build it into your routine and to make it a part of that work-life balance. Do things that excite you, that make you happy. That concludes this podcast episode. Thanks for listening. If you're enjoying our show, you can also visit our website, claimyourpotential.com, to access our blog, listen to previous and future episodes, leave a review, and subscribe to our newsletter. For more content, you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Claim Potential for inspiration, episode and blog post announcements, episode excerpts, along with other content for you to reach your full potential. A free way to support our show is by leaving it a rating and review on the podcast streaming platform of your choice. If you're not sure how to do this, you can head over to the Leave a Review page on our website for instructions. Thank you, everyone, and tune in next time where we'll continue to learn how you can claim your potential.